Thank you, everyone starting to join us. We're going to be waiting another minute or two as more folks join before we get going. For those continuing to join us, just letting you know we're waiting another minute or so before we get going. Thank you for your patience. With that, we're going to get going. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Helen Wiley. I'm our Disaster Preparedness Program Director at SBP, and we're so glad to have everyone join us today for this webinar on Extreme Heat 101. We're very happy to be bringing this topic to you today in conjunction with our partners at Niagara Cares who make this work possible. Next slide, please. At SBP, our mission as a nonprofit organization is to reduce the time between disasters and recovery. And our organization's been in existence for almost 20 years now. We were founded originally after Hurricane Katrina down in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, as a rebuild org. Eventually, as we continue to scale our programs and impacts, we shortened the name to SBP. But you can see today that our work spans many different programmatic areas, not just rebuilding home, but sharing lessons learned from our work, preparing community members, advising government and other community leaders, and advocating for needed changes across the disaster cycle to better serve low-income communities. Next slide, please. And specifically in our disaster preparedness program, which is in our larger advisory services division, we really work to empower not only households, but businesses and community leaders, so both in local government and nonprofits, to have the right tools to more proactively prepare and build resilience to minimize the impacts that they sustain after disaster events. And we really believe working with all these stakeholder types is critical, given that preparedness is really a collective action that we all need to take. You can learn more about our program and others at sbpusa.org. Next slide, please. And so with that here, if any of you are practitioners joining us today versus folks as individuals seeking to work on your own preparedness, you can see we have a number of different areas that we work in. And so for our nonprofit partners, we do a lot of forms of technical assistance, both through consulting services, as well as hosting different types of trainings, either online or in person. Additionally, while we're focusing in on extreme heat today, SBP has a really robust online resource hub of both preparedness and recovery resources. You can see the link for that at the bottom of our screen here. And there's great household resources, whether it's in the form of guides and checklists, videos, recordings of different past trainings, as well as finding upcoming trainings for both households and practitioners. And so we encourage you all to go check those out. Next slide, please. And so with that, you can see our topics here, and I'm going to share a few housekeeping notes as we launch into today's discussion. So first off, as you will have seen, that this webinar is recorded. So if anyone has to jump off early, we will be sending out the recording to everyone following this, both those that are currently on as well as those that registered. Second, if you have any questions throughout, please put them in the Q&A box. We really welcome this to be engaged, and so we'll be answering questions at the end of today's session, but anything that pops into your head, please feel free to add it there in the Q&A. You're also welcome, if you wish, to introduce yourself in the chat if you're coming from an org or where you're located around the country. We always like seeing where people are based. And so with that, we're going to go over today, this webinar is really geared first and foremost for individuals that are seeking to better prepare for extreme heat. And this is a disaster event, as Tessa will be sharing with you, that a lot of folks don't have much familiarity with of some key action areas. And so she'll first be sharing extreme heat basics and then launching into some of those key actions that folks can take. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tessa.
Thanks so much, Helen, and good morning, good afternoon, folks, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Tessa Barron, and I am SVP's Disaster Preparedness Program Associate in our Prepare program. And like Helen said, we're going to be talking today about different key actions to help you best get prepared for extreme heat. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time at the start of the session today going over a definition of extreme heat and extreme heat basics. And so starting with our definition, we define extreme heat as a period of high heat and humidity with temperatures above 90 degrees for a period of at least 2 to 3 days. Importantly, we want to make sure we understand what are those different factors that have an influence on extreme heat. And so some key criteria are location, weather conditions, and what time of year are we looking at. So for example, if we're talking about a day with 100-degree weather in Phoenix, Arizona, that might be pretty typical weather conditions as opposed to anywhere in Alaska. An 100-degree weather day really might be considered to be quite extreme. So different criteria, different considerations that influence extreme heat. And so shifting gears still in our introductory look at what extreme heat is, wanting to walk through a couple basics. First, it's critical for us to understand when extreme heat typically occurs. And so we're looking at a time frame of May to October. So with today being we're already into June, certainly we are in the mix of extreme heat. And so these conversations, these types of learning sessions are going to give you guys critical tools to help you stay safe as we continue to weather extreme heat season. Where can extreme heat occur? It can take place in any region of the country. So no matter where folks are joining in from today, there are absolutely going to be steps that we want to encourage you to take to bolster your preparedness. How does it work? So when we're talking about extreme heat, this is a weather type that's different than other disaster events that we talk about at SVP. This is a slow-moving disaster type that can cover a large geographical area. We'll look in the next slide at a really nice picture of that. And how it works, just to get into the science behind it, is this slow-moving high-pressure weather system forces air downward, and that air then gets trapped near the ground and warms up and then causes that heat that we're seeing, and of course, extreme heat events. And so that's just a little bit of background information there. We wanted to just take a moment to walk through the difference between extreme heat and a heat wave. These are two terms that often get exchanged or interchanged, but there is a slight difference, although again, they are certainly related. And so when we're talking about heat waves, what we're referring to are periods of abnormally high temperatures that can last from a period of just a few days to a longer term period of multiple months. And so I did just sort of mention that we'll take a look here at this really nice graph that shows us just how expansive extreme heat events can be. And so again, really want to emphasize that this extreme heat disaster type we're talking about, it is really unique in the fact that, again, it's slow moving and can cover large periods or large areas throughout the country. And so again, this graph does a really nice job of showing that to us. But it's important for us, before we get into what these key actions are, to not only understand what extreme heat is, what is that definition, how do extreme heat and heat waves differ, but also what are the impacts that they can have and who is going to be most impacted. And so extreme heat certainly can affect everyone throughout the nation, but specific populations can be more vulnerable and have higher risk of being impacted by heat-related health concerns. And so we wanted to just start here by walking through at a high level what some of these groups are. So that way, if there's anyone in your network, your neighbor, your family that fall into these categories, so you can just make sure that you're playing your part in helping to best get them prepared. So some examples include older adults, children, pregnant people, individuals with disabilities, those with chronic health conditions, with pre-existing health conditions, and those individuals that are living in more densely populated areas such as a city landscape. And so, what does that mean? What do those health impacts look like? Well, when we're talking about human health, we can see things like heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and other types of heat related illnesses. And we'll talk a little bit later on about some safety tricks and tips for you to keep top of mind should you be impacted by extreme heat later in the summer months. When it comes to daily activity, extreme heat has an impact on the infrastructure that makes up our daily lives. So school, recreational activities, it can cause impacts in the home or the workplace and more. And as we sort of wrap up here and we shift gears and in the next few slides to take a look at these actions, we wanted to just really emphasize how impactful extreme heat can be. We see, and if you look on the slide here, this call out box shows us that extreme heat is the leading cause of weather related death in the United States, which is very profound. But even more so, we see that this risk of heat related death and illness is expected to increase. So it really is on us to take time to learn how to get prepared. And everyone that's on the call today is doing a great first job of understanding what those next steps to building your personal preparedness are. And so getting into kind of the compounding impacts and why extreme heat is so unique. Well, we see again, the last slide showed us that extreme heat can be absolutely deadly. That's on its own. When we layer in extreme heat to other types of disaster events, the impacts can be absolutely catastrophic. So this is something that, again, while we're really keying in here on extreme heat, we do need to be thinking about other disaster events that may take place at the same time that could, again, really make the impacts much worse than they otherwise would be. So for a couple call outs here, it's June 11th today. And so we are in hurricane season officially. And so there's a large overlap there with extreme heat and hurricanes. So certainly something to keep top of mind as you're best preparing for extreme heat events. Hurricanes need to be top of mind too. Tornadoes, we know, unfortunately, those can happen year round. So there's certainly overlap there, but they are very common in spring and summer months. And flooding is another type of disaster event that the unfortunate reality is that it could happen anywhere throughout the nation at any time throughout the year. So certainly something to keep top of mind when it comes to better preparing yourself, your family, and your household. And so we'll shift gears now here to talk about preparedness actions. And what it really starts with is better understanding your risks, knowing that across the board, we're seeing more extreme weather that's more frequent and more intense. And areas that potentially hadn't dealt with certain types of disasters in the past may now face increasing risks. And so what that means is that our first step is to really take time to understand what our risks are and have that be our foundation. From there, once we understand those risks, then we can take the proper actions to best prepare ourselves. And so we wanted to just provide here this 2025 temperature outlook. And there's a really helpful graph here on the slide that was provided by NOAA of the temperature outlook for the year. And what we see is that unfortunately, the projections are severe in many areas throughout the country. Many areas are expected to deal with extreme heat events that are temperature events that are above average for what that area typically deals with. And so just grounding us here and why it's so important to take steps to get ourselves ready to withstand extreme heat events. This, is projected to be something that throughout the nation, we will all be dealing with in the coming months as we get further into the summer season. And so just as important as it is to take time in advance to understand what your risks are, ahead of disasters, ahead of extreme heat hitting, it is also so important to your safety that you're staying plugged into information sources. Because again, we know that extreme heat can happen anywhere throughout the country. So it's absolutely critical to understand weather when it's approaching so you can take the right steps to stay safe. And so we have just a couple examples listed out here: local news, local weather apps. Maybe the area that you live has a specific emergency alert system. NOAA's weather has weather radios that are battery powered. So in the event that you lose power, that's a great way to plug in. And so again, just wanting to make sure that we have these apps and these different alert systems, et cetera, downloaded on our phone and we have familiarity with them so we can stay plugged in, so we could stay safe. And just kind of showing a couple local examples here, we had looked at the city of Houston, and looked for some local resources to show an example of what this could look like for you. And so what we really advise folks to do, because we want to make sure that you have custom tailored risk information and emergency information that's tailored to your area, we really want to encourage you to look up your location and emergency alerts. Or if we're wanting to talk about extreme heat specifically, extreme heat resources, extreme heat information. So that way you can get that localized information that's going to be key to helping to make sure that you have the knowledge that you need to stay safe when extreme heat is here. And another part of this is really understanding that, you have your emergency alerts downloaded, you have your apps on your phone ready to go, but you need to make sure that you understand what those warning messages are. And so we'll just take a few moments here to walk through some of the key terminology that you might see. The first is an advisory. And so what an advisory means is that dangerous heat is predicted to occur, but not expected to reach extreme heat warning criteria. When it comes to a watch, what we really want to urge folks to understand here is that this means be prepared. Dangerous heat is possible. And when it comes to a warning, this is our most extreme terminology to understand. A warning means take action. Dangerous heat either is already occurring or it's about to occur. So just important to understand that we know the difference between these different terms so we know what actions to take when we see them and when we get those alerts. When it comes to extreme heat, wanting to make sure that you have the right supplies that you need for your safety. And so we have a couple items bolded and we'll walk through a few, but I do just want to mention that we have a longer list. It's a checklist on our resource hub at SVP. And so you are more than welcome to print that and then have that so you can physically check it off as you bring different items to your kit. No matter what disaster type we're talking about, we are always going to recommend having non-perishable food and bottled water for 2-3 weeks worth of supplies. So 2 to 3 would, certainly be our top recommendation. When it comes to extreme heat specifics, we really want to draw your attention to a couple things here. The first is a handheld or box fan and batteries, and we'll talk more about fans a little bit later on. Lightweight clothing, wide brimmed hats, sunscreen, sunglasses. We don't want folks to go outside if you can avoid it between about 10 and 4 p.m. But if there's no way around it and you have to get outside, we want to make sure that you have this protective gear in order to keep yourself safe. Ice packs are another important item to have if you can, and air conditioning units as the best cooling mechanism to help keep you cool should you experience an extreme heat event. And wanting to take a moment here to just briefly say, we know that some of these lists can seem pretty lengthy, but there absolutely are cost-effective approaches that you can take to pull together your kit in an affordable way. And so I'll just highlight one or two, but we have a larger guide on our resource hub at SVP that we really encourage you to check out to learn more. But one that I'll highlight here is if you take time in advance to pull together your kit. You can actually spread out your purchases throughout the year. So that way you can pick up items as they're on sale, as different coupons become available, and things like that. So that way you don't have to get everything all at once. But again, we'll direct you to our resource hub to check out more of the cost effective approaches that we have to pulling together your supplies kits. When it comes to emergencies, having an emergency plan during an extreme heat event is critical. And that's because we know that having a plan in place that you have practiced and updated, and you know it like the back of your hand, it's going to help to save you time in an emergency. You don't have to think about what to do. You know what to do. You know how to act to stay safe. So checking those emergency supplies that we just talked about annually is key. Staying plugged into information sources that we talked about a few slides back to make sure you get that information as extreme heat is imminent. Again, practicing that plan, we want this to be second nature. We want you to know it like the back of your hand so you waste no time in an emergency. And talking for a moment here about primary cooling devices. When it comes to extreme heat, we need to make sure for your safety, for the safety of your family members and those in your network, that folks are staying cool. We had a few slides back a fan as one of the recommended items. I want to make a note here that fans are great tools that can help you to feel good, but the best tool to help reduce your internal body temperature and really help to keep you cool is going to be an air conditioning unit, going to an air conditioned location. Although fans certainly can supplement that. And that brings us nicely into this next bullet here of needing to take time in advance to understand where your local cooling centers are. So that way, again, when extreme heat is here, you know right where to go to stay safe and stay cool if your home is not properly air conditioned. And then, of course, we're always wanting to care for our neighbors. If we know our neighbors have certain needs, if there are ways that we could step in and help to keep them safe, that absolutely is a key part of our emergency plan. And so talking about extreme heat safety, again, really emphasizing here that air conditioning location, getting yourself to one if your home is not properly air conditioned is key. We want to make sure that folks stay hydrated. So drinking plenty of water and avoiding any sugary beverages or any alcoholic beverages, wearing that lightweight clothing that we had talked about, avoiding any high energy activities. Again, we'll want to emphasize if you can avoid going outside, especially between the hours of 10 and 4, that's going to go a long way in helping to keep you safe. But if you do have to go outside, using that protective gear and staying under shade is going to go a long way. We'll talk more about heat-related illnesses in just a moment, but again, checking on loved ones, on neighbors to help make sure that folks are staying safe. For extreme heat safety, we want to point you to this CDC resource here for more in-depth information. But at a high level, it's important to understand that things like sunburn, dehydration, heat cramps, these are signs of heat-related illnesses. So having a keen eye, knowing what to look for, and then knowing when to bring in medical professional help is very important when it comes to extreme heat safety. And of course, again, we're really emphasizing here the importance of your networks and checking in on your neighbors and making sure that if you are able to help folks, that you are. And so shifting gears here, we talked about preparing yourself, getting the supplies that you need, getting that emergency plan ready and in place. We also want to make sure that your home is in good shape and it is ready to go. And it's a safe place for you to hunker down if your area is dealing with extreme heat. So some annual inspections and maintenance actions that we want to urge folks to take are checking your air conditioning ducts for proper insulation and checking the caulk, weather stripping, and insulation. These two kind of go hand in hand. They're very important. If again, we're talking about the fact that we want folks to stay cool. And so making sure that your air conditioning is in good working order and again, it's working properly, but then also ensuring that your house is properly weatherized. So that way, if you are getting cool air, if your air conditioning works great, that cool air stays inside of your home. Other actions that we really want to encourage folks to take or bring in outside help if needed, install window air conditioners and add insulation. So same idea, bringing in more cool air to your house if needed and weatherizing that home with that insulation, making sure that cool air stays in. covering windows with drapes or shades, awnings, other types of protective covering, and if possible, installing window reflectors that can then reflect that heat back outside so it's not in your home. And then wrapping up here with power outages. We know that power outages can happen at any time throughout the year, but they certainly can have really adverse health impacts if it happens during an extreme heat event. So some quick actions to prepare for a power outage are testing your fire alarms and those carbon monoxide detectors to make sure they are in good shape, and picking out an alternative power source that's going to meet your family's power needs should you lose your primary source. If you are experiencing a power outage, a couple safety actions are, if you're going to use a generator, make sure you know how to use it safely and you follow those safety precautions. Unplug any appliances or any electronics throughout your home, and just making sure for your safety to not use a gas stovetop or an oven. And so we'll wrap up here. Again, this was an introductory look at different actions that we really want to encourage folks to take. But knowing those risks, staying informed, making that emergency plan to deploy during an emergency, getting your home ready with those inspections and maintenance actions, and learning extreme heat safety actions are all combined, going to work in conjunction with one another to help you get prepared and stay safe should you experience any extreme heat. And so wanting to just point out here, I called out our resource hub a few times. I will be following up with folks once we wrap up to share the recording and different links like that of our resource hub, but we'll welcome you to check that out afterwards, as along with our new extreme heat resource guide that we have in English and in Spanish. So I'll point that out for folks. And we have a new video resource on extreme heat that walks through 5 key actions that you can take to get prepared for extreme heat events. So we'll share that over email as well, but happy to share that new resource with folks. And as we go into any questions that folks have as we start to wrap up, we'll leave this survey up here. If folks wouldn't mind just taking 1 minute to complete this survey, it really helps us to evaluate learning and to help us better shape presentations for the future. So we'd love to hear from you. And with that, I will open it up for any questions. I think you're muted over there, Helen.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you so much, Tessa, for sharing all that information today. It's a lot to take in. And what we just want to emphasize as well is so many of these actions here, while some of them are very specific to extreme heat, overall preparedness planning is so critical across all the disaster types, and especially when extreme heat events only compound what folks are facing after floods, severe wildfires, etc. So please continue to put your questions in the chat. We've got a good amount of time here to start answering them. I want to note the first question that came in, which I'm going to answer quickly, but someone asked, what are some of the ways that I can identify if someone is suffering from heat stroke or heat exhaustion? And so we are not medical professionals, and so I placed an answer there directing you to the National Weather Service, which lists out a lot of the key signs of heat exhaustion. So those include dizziness, thirst, heavy sweating, nausea, weakness, but would encourage you to spend more time going through in detail, particularly if you have older adult family members or those that are very young and could be more susceptible. For our next question, Tessa, turning now to you. This folk asks, what is the best first step that I can take or recommend others to take to get prepared for extreme heat? So what's one of your top tips, Tessa?
Yeah, so it's tough. I think everything we shared out is a great first step. My recommendation, though, is really starting where we started our session. So to take time to understand what your risks are. One of the most important things to understand, and Helen just touched on this as well, is that extreme heat can compound with other disaster types and really have such a detrimental impact on your health. And so really understanding what other disaster risks you might be dealing with, coupled with extreme heat, so that way you can take as many protective and preparedness actions as possible to get ready to weather the next storm.
Thank you for that, Tessa. And a very specific question here. So going back to safety issues, why shouldn't individuals use gas stove tops? particularly when we're thinking about extreme heat and other severe weather events.
Yeah, so we really want to point folks to other different types of much safer um, resources to use and tools to use when we're talking about gas stovetops and things like that. One thing we want to keep top of mind is carbon monoxide poisoning, and wanting to make sure that we're keeping ourselves best protected from that. And so using a gas stovetop or an oven is going to be quite a dangerous thing to do, that's going to leave you susceptible to different things like carbon monoxide poisoning. And so again, wanting to point folks to using other, certainly not using that, but to consider other types of primary tools to, have in your back pocket.
Thank you, Tessa. And we have a question here from Haven asking, how do we better inform individuals who work outside in particular, and keep them safe from heat exhaustion and heat stroke? So thinking about, construction workers, those that are outside for sustained periods when it's very hot often, what are some of these ways in which we can try to get more information out to them?
Yeah, that's really important. And thanks for raising that question. We definitely want to make sure that these folks understand what the risks are for not taking proper preparedness steps. And so understanding those risks really is going to help to go a long way to urge folks to take those next steps to get prepared, and giving folks the right tools that they need, sharing information like what we shared out in the beginning of using those protective gear, wide brim hats, sunglasses, lightweight clothing, sunblock, things like that. And also taking breaks and staying properly hydrated is something that's going to go a long way. And so ensuring that folks have enough water, if they check, whatever type of weather alert in advance, they know what the weather is going to be for the day, then they can bring 2 water bottles. They can bring an extra one. They can bring a cooler. So that way we're not dealing with dehydration, which can then lead to more extreme health impacts. Also, if possible, urging folks to, when you're taking breaks, go in the shade, go in your car and turn on the air conditioning, go in a building, whatever those breaks are that you can build in the day to give the body a chance to reset, cool down, is, certainly one way that we can help to urge folks to stay safe.
Thanks, Tessa. And we've got lots of good questions today, and please keep sending them in, everyone. Um, Someone asks, I've heard about cooling centers before, but where can I find the ones closest to me?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thanks for asking. So there's a couple different routes that we want to folks to consider for where you can get this information that's local to you. So the first is 211, reaching out to your local 211, and they certainly have that information and can point you in the right direction. The second route to consider is reaching out or looking on the website of your local health department or your local emergency management agency, sending an email, giving a call, and they should be able to point you in the right direction. The last resource we'll point you to is the National Center for Healthy Housing, has a really great state-by-state resource that has lists of different cooling centers. So between those 3 different avenues, you certainly should be able to find information on where your local cooling center is.
Thank you, Tessa. And one thing I want to emphasize there as well is, Tessa talked a little bit earlier about power outages. And so just again, I'm really big into helping us prepare here for multiple types of disasters at the same time. So again, critical part of preparedness planning is knowing where those places are that are more likely to have generators and be able to keep you cool when it's extremely hot out. So if there's been a hurricane or another major event and power's out throughout the area, and then it's hot on top of that, it only compounds that importance of knowing where these safe locations are, where not only you can be safely outside your home, but also have access to air conditioning, ideally. So next question here, and we've got so many good ones. How can we support vulnerable groups that you mentioned during extreme heat events? So you already spoke to some of this, Tessa, but any other things as you're thinking about, whether it's older adult individuals who might be more isolated at home, neighbors that folks know are going to be less able to get out of their homes. So yeah, what are some other things for folks to think about to help those around them?
Yeah, I think one thing, and thanks for that question there. One thing is communication is key. And so we want to make sure that say, for example, older adults in particular as a vulnerable group that we had talked about, making sure that they are getting plugged into information sources and they're able to receive that information. It's great that we have these apps and we have these different alert systems, but if they're not reaching those who need them, then they really are missing a target population. So one thing that folks can do on the call is maybe you have a grandparent or a neighbor that is elderly or anyone else in your network that falls into any of those vulnerable categories. Have a conversation with them and see if they're thinking about disaster preparedness. And if not, you can be the one that brings that information to them. You can sit with them and help them to download different apps and come up with a plan for them. And of course, as a part of your plan, that can be reaching out to your neighbors to make sure that they're aware of any extreme heat situations and that they're taking any proper steps to stay safe. Another thing I'll mention, and we talked a little bit about at the end about inspections and maintenance actions. And so those are actions that we encourage folks to take at least once a year to help keep their house in good shape. But maybe someone isn't able to, do whatever action to help keep their house safe. Maybe they have mobility issues, and need some extra help. So if there's someone in your family, if there's someone in your network that you can help, take different actions, check their fire alarms and carbon monoxide detectors and things like that. Whatever you can do to help those in your network is going to go a long way.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tessa. And I think this question really complements that one, which is about like how to specifically as an individual contribute to heat awareness and preparedness in your community. And so I think just other things to think about is, if you're active in a youth group or in a church community or a sports league, there's so many different things where people give back in their communities. But think about, what are some of the key takeaways from today? Go through our key actions guide around extreme heat and think about what are those, really main things you want to share with folks within your network and see, for instance, at your local church, congregation, faith-based group, are there opportunities to work with some others to do a local campaign and help with some other community members within your community? And so I think there's a lot of ways to give back, working with your local YMCA to help members get prepared. But lots of great things we can do here. So we're winding down, but we still have a few open questions here. And so before we switch gear to some that are less specific to extreme heat, can you just clarify for us, Tessa, what is the best primary cooling device and why?
Yeah, absolutely. And so apologies for any confusion on this front. We had talked about fans, box fans, and handheld fans and air conditioning. Our top recommendation, the best tool is an air conditioned location, an air conditioning unit. That's going to help to actually reduce your core body temperature. Fans will not do that. They feel good and they're a nice supplement to an air conditioned location, an air conditioning unit, but they're not actually going to reduce your body temperature. So air conditioning is the way to go.
Thanks for that, Tessa. And hopefully that's something that'll be hammered home for everyone now. Of again, we know not everyone has AC access, so that's why you want to work with your friends, neighbors, or finding a cooling center if you have a power outage. One more question here. So what is your recommended alert system to stay informed about extreme heat events?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I would direct folks to is any local alert systems that you have. So, for example, if we have any folks that are joining from New Orleans, NOLA Ready is the alert system that we would recommend folks to get plugged into, where you can get alerts about incoming weather so you can take protective actions. So, really, it's that localized, local custom tailor alert system that we want to encourage folks to get plugged into. And so, maybe doing a little bit of research, looking up your location and emergency alert system, reaching out to your emergency management agency to see if they can point you in the right direction. That would be our top recommendation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tessa. And I think depending on what methods people use, if you have TV service still, watching the local news to see what the weatherman is recommended in terms of staying outside or not during different periods. But also knowing if you don't have TV, that there's so much online now. And so you can search for your local station and see what, news articles they put up to tell you the current weather alerts. Um, And so one last question, and then we're winding down. So this is the last chance for anyone if you want to add any more questions here. Tessa's doing a great job answering everyone's questions. So we have another question here that is thinking about car issues during extreme heat. And on this one, we might need to circle back to you on. But when we think about areas of the country like Death Valley, where you have extremely high temperatures, it's often recommended not to drive during certain parts of the day there because you can have car breakdowns and then people are at risk. And so, are there any recommendations that we know of to keep cars up and running so folks don't get stranded and have ways to cool off if they're outside?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think we'll need to circle back with you on specific ways to keep your car from breaking
Not
down.
our expertise area.
But I will just say, so two things that I can think of top of mind are one, keeping your car in good shape. So we talked about inspections and maintenance actions for your household. Well, it's just as important that you're getting your car inspected regularly, taking it into the shop if there's anything that you think needs to get inspected before extreme heat season. So that's one thing. So at least you know you're being diligent and keeping your car in good shape. The other thing, which isn't directly related to your question, but one nice supplement is having a to-go kit in your car. So we talked about supplies to have at home for a period of about 2-3 weeks, if possible, having supplies to last that long for your car. We also typically recommend to have a to-go kit with 3 days worth of supplies, making sure especially that you have those extreme heat items, but also those basic necessities that we'll want no matter what time of year it is, food, water, etc. But having those things, so if you do get stranded, if your car does break down, you at least have the tools and things that you need to keep yourself safe until folks can come help you. So hopefully that helps, but we'll do some digging and follow up with folks with more information there.
Yeah, and thanks, Tessa. No, and the car kit would be my recommendation as well. Again, it really works universally across disaster events. So having some key supplies, but particularly in this case, water, in case you get stranded, is really important. And so with that, we're going to be wrapping up. And so just the final questions here. Someone asked if we have a guide on how to prepare your home for disasters. Yes, please go to our resource hub at sbpusa.org/resource hub. And so you can find that guide about different home protection actions, as well as so many other issue areas. And then additionally, we have a question of, will there be other presentations like this one this summer? And the answer is yes. SBP, we always have a lot of webinars and trainings ongoing with partners. And so again, at our resource hub, you can see different currently listed publicly available webinars that our different teams are conducting. If you work at another nonprofit or local government or another agency, you can also look at the different training service areas we offer in case there's an opportunity for us to custom tailor something specifically for you and your audience base. And so with that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to us via email with any additional questions you have around extreme heat issues, as well as other preparedness issue areas. We were so happy you could join today. And we'd like to thank our partners again at Niagara Cares for making today's training and education content available for all of you.